I think it'd be most appropriate to start off first with, who are you? Why are you on this stream?
I don't know, maybe you, like, ran out of people to interview or something, so I'm like, here. No, I run a nonprofit called Rise Above the Disorder, or urrad.org. Um, Effectively, it's like a universal mental health care system. People from all over the world come into our programs, people that would love to start therapy, but maybe have had difficulties finding a good therapist to see, and most definitely have struggled to afford the cost of therapy, given the high price of it these days. So we do kind of one of two things or both things if needed. One, find people really great therapists, and then two, cover the cost with the donations that we raise. We do this at a pretty large scale, with about, I want to say, like 58,000 people across 135 countries going through our programs. So it's a very large operation. Um, and yeah, I think we connected mostly through Theo, um, and mostly because I built the website for all of this and asked Theo for help one day, and he kind of took me on and mentored me on how to build websites and stuff.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Um, I think that it is first off, it's very cool that you were so motivated that you got good at
Oh,
building websites. So that in of itself is pretty cool. But second off, I know my audience well enough that I know a lot of them struggle specifically with. I think imposter syndrome is one of the largest things that I see people mention. And you
yeah,
actually mentioned that when we were hanging out on the last night at TwitchCon.
yeah.
You did mention some of that. I would like to hear some of your thoughts on that. What do you think people, especially in our industry, the programming industry, things they can really get, can kind of look into on that? And then second, also burnout. Burnout's also really another big popular topic, specifically among programmers. And you might even have a little bit, probably of both of those during your time making a website for the first time.
Yeah, yeah. I I've tried to do lots of stuff within the dev space. This past like year or so. Previous to that, I think a lot of Rise Above the Disorder, was really promoting within the gaming space, doing fundraisers with gaming content creators. The whole dev space was really new to me. It's still really new to me, and as I've gotten into it, it's been very much different extremities, I suppose. A lot of the people that we get in our programs from the dev community, they can't afford mental health care, which seems kind of curious at first, given that dev jobs tend to be relatively high paying. Except that doesn't seem to apply in other places throughout the world where dev jobs don't pay a whole lot. So we get people who have a lot of experience, are very intelligent, very bright, but don't make really any money as a dev. And they're in our programs. And then we get people who the financial side is not at all an issue for, but they're going through pretty unique kind of dilemmas. Imposter syndrome, is probably the most common between the two. Um, and I think the types of imposter syndrome tend to be very kind of all over the place. But I think the most common one I see within imposter syndrome, interestingly enough, is people struggling with their stack, struggling to decide what their stack should be made out of, and that somehow that kind of rabbit hole is a way for them to um, almost avoid going further into the imposter syndrome. It's kind of like I have to figure out what stack I want to run with before I can go forward with this idea that I inherently feel might fail or might expose me to criticism in some way. Um, so we see a lot of that. Also see imposter syndrome, kind of dive into, am I coding in the right language? Um, I think we had somebody in our program who had actually wanted to become a developer, heard about us through Theo, and has been interested in starting school, going to their local uni to become a developer, but has been putting that off for almost 5 years now because they don't know what language to start with. Obviously, there's much more into that, right? Like there's a lot of things that are keeping them from going further. But we've even had developers who it would be hard to dispute that they were wildly successful in their endeavors, but despite launching programs, getting funding, things like that, just don't feel like they deserve that success or feel like at some point people are going to figure out they're not a good dev in their own terms and they'll be exposed. Um, burnout, burnout with developers is very, very high. Usually I see imposter syndrome and burnout, stacked on top of each other here.
Okay. That's kind of an interesting take on the imposter syndrome that there's so many different ones. And I mean, I guess I'm personally shocked that people would be so analysis paralysis on even just choosing a language. At the end of the day, I mean, the amount of posts people saying just pick anything, the amount of times I see anyone just say like just do like anything is better than nothing because nothing keeps you in the same position you're already in. And so
Yeah.
why not try something before nothing? So I guess that I mean for me that one's a little bit surprising. I've never really seen that one. But I guess I am everyone here is probably they're already everyone in Twitch chat and and on the YouTubes are already trying to make some sort of decision already programming. So I guess I'm kind of missing that very tippy top of the funnel.
Yeah, imposter syndrome is an interesting thing. The history of this is we actually not even that many decades ago assumed that imposter syndrome only happened to women. And it wasn't really until the last like decade and a half or so that we actually, um, came up with the idea that imposter syndrome affects everybody. And then within that span of time, that imposter syndrome now affects a lot of people. Imposter syndrome tends to break itself into two different directions. There's the procrastination side of imposter syndrome, where we're essentially, kind of avoiding what's going on and finding different ways to uh, fill our time with other things that our brain is prioritizing or deeming more important. Um, and then we have the over preparation side of this. That is what I see very, very commonly amongst devs. The over preparation side of imposter syndrome is essentially perfection. It's not wanting to go forward unless we've done absolutely everything right. Um, and in turn, both procrastination and over preparation are ways for us to ultimately avoid doing something that we're not comfortable with, something that we might have been, I don't know, maybe somebody was critical of us in the past for it or things didn't go well. They're ways of avoiding making a decision, doing the action. So what they get caught up in, that's usually cultural. And I think because so many people are trying to pitch different stacks, sell you on different stacks, or have different frameworks that they can monetize towards certain stacks, it makes sense why so many developers get stuck at which stack should I go with because they're looking through YouTube, they're looking through Twitter, and people are making fun of different frameworks, different tools, different things like that. People are very zealous about their particular stack. And so a developer gets stuck in that phase, but it's ultimately them just over preparing. If I go with the wrong stack, maybe this won't work. If I go with the right stack, maybe it will work.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, in the sense that I don't know. Maybe it's trauma for me. Maybe it's something. Maybe it's whatever it is. But in my head, I just have this inherent desire to move, and so like I am fine always making the wrong decision in the time because I can always go back and fix it. Whereas, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is I mean, part of it sounds like it's just a worry of making the wrong decision.
Yeah, yeah. And the way the brain does this is our brain is very like this is such a strange term, I guess a startup term, but our brain stack ranks issues in our mind. And in some ways, when we are over preparing this side of imposter syndrome, we are putting other things forward before the decision, before the action we don't want to take, the one we're not comfortable taking. Instead, we get more manageable ones that we think we could actually prepare for, and thus in defeating that problem will then it'll be easier to face the other problem I don't want to. So, maybe you want to make a decision about which language you learn first, but in your mind, ultimately, it's the decision that I want to get into programming and not maybe something that my parents want me to do or other people want me to do. Or maybe it's just making a decision in general that if I make the wrong decision towards my life, I could fail. And it gets pushed back and back and back until it becomes this more surface level issue because maybe if I can make a decision on that surface level issue, the other stuff gets easier, but it doesn't.
That uh, yeah, I mean, it only compounds everything. As far as I can tell, I mean, no matter how good procrastination feels in the moment, it only compounds. At least for me, it compounds any of my problems that I'm having into just further problems. And that's usually never a healthy thing. All right, so I would love to also hear some of your thoughts on uh, burnout because obviously I'm not a very well versed individual such as yourself, and so you have these beautiful ways of describing things. So I'd love if you took a moment to talk a little bit about burnout because it seems like everybody here really enjoys what you're saying. They really feel like they're like, oh, he sees me. He knows me, right? And so it sounds like you just have a way of saying things that is fantastic. So I mean, a
Oh,
lot of
glad.
I get this is probably my more common question I get at least in Twitch chat is going to be centered around burnout and not
Mm.
centered around imposter syndrome. I have my own personal thoughts on burnout, but I'd like to hear maybe someone that has been around enough people to have perhaps a wiser opinion than mine.
Yeah, I mean, burnout. I mean, the beautiful part about burnout, imposter syndrome, is that I mean these are disorders. These are diagnosables. These are things that we can understand, and we can have opinions on various aspects of them. But do they exist? Yes. Do they impact the body? Yes. Do we see them impact the physical makeup of the brain and change our moods, our behaviors, our social interaction? Absolutely. Are they treatable? Definitely. Um, Burnout is a very, very curious condition. Um, and for the most part, we see burnout as a catch-all term for somebody who's kind of just over what they've been working on, and is they're starting to feel that the drain of it all. um, more to the term of like a clinical case of burnout, we have somebody who has been working on the same problem for a very long time and is not feeling the solution, the reward cycle kick in. Um, if your goal is to build the biggest I don't know SaaS company in history, that's a pretty big, lofty goal. How you get there, how you measure the steps towards getting there, how you chart progress towards these things becomes very, very vague, and it's not going to feel like you're making real progress towards that until you are the biggest SaaS company or run the biggest SaaS company in the world. It's just going to kind of feel like trudging through the mud. Um, People that are experiencing burnout are often in that space. Goals become more obscure, more confused. The sense of reward, the sense of achievement starts to become diluted. It's not felt, it's not present in each day. And the brain naturally starts to kind of tune out of it. Our ability to even focus on some of these things starts to go away. Um, Over time, burnout starts to be felt physically. The body just feels exhausted. The brain feels exhausted. You have a lot more of those moments where you're just kind of blank and unfocused. People tend to um, look at what they were working on as being less valuable, less interesting, as a way of almost kind of dealing with that disconnection. Maybe this isn't what I want, or maybe this isn't the place I want to be, or who cares about building the biggest SaaS company? It's our brain's way of coping with the vagueness of it all. Um, but it is not uncommon for burnout to progress in a sense into something like depression or into something like an anxiety disorder. And that's usually where we see people the most when burnout progresses into depression, when it goes towards not only do I not know what I'm supposed to be doing, but I don't think I could do it even if I did, or I don't feel like I could do anything. I don't have the energy to do anything. It's waking up without the motivation. It's waking up without the direction, the goal, and feeling lost a lot of the time.
Mm. Yeah, my only kind of general experience with that is I was working on something called Falcor a way back. F's in the chat for Falcor, but like I was just working, gosh, 70 hours a week for an exceptionally long period of time, and it just kept going, and the goals just kept moving. Everything just kept changing over and over and over again. And as I mentioned, I'm a very biased to action kind of person, and growing up being I guess, growing up in an environment in which you're very poor and you have to kind of like fight for what you have, I kind of have this continual push inside of me to keep going. And I remember by Christmas, I remember receiving a phone call on Christmas Eve about another way we could do something. And I felt like instead of, I never really had the feeling of like being so tired I couldn't do anything. I just remember an ever growing like angst or anger inside of me where it's just like I felt more and more angry, and I felt more and more like I just want to just like quit the whole thing, right? Like I guess that's more of my response. I'm not sure if that is of the same vein, but it just lasted for months to the point where afterwards I just quit, and then I didn't do any open source programming. I didn't do anything beyond what was absolutely required of me. Quiet quitting, I guess, as some people kind of call it, slightly more than quiet quitting. It'd be very hard for me to do that, but something like that for like 3 straight years. Like it was impossible for me to kind of go beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, burnout looks a lot like that. It is something that can be diagnosed with more, I guess, exploration into that. But burnout can leave remnants of like trauma within our life as well, where we start to become pretty opposed to things that we burnt out of. Maybe you don't ever want to work in a certain field anymore, or work for a certain company anymore, work for certain types of people anymore, because it's connected to that, almost like this sense of hopelessness. um, it is something that there is a lot of research into, what gives people a sense of fulfillment, and usually, it's some kind of monetary um, component, which is actually kind of the lowest necessary one for us. Then there is acknowledgement and praise for what we were doing. And then there is like a deeper connection to community that's found through it. When we have these things, we feel pretty good. We feel like we're moving forward. But for a lot of developers that are working for a company alongside a bunch of other developers who are just seeing ticket after tickets, or given kind of an idea for a project, and they're just supposed to execute on this stuff, it can be pretty hard to find a sense of meaning, community, even if the monetary side is really high. um, there's there's just a lot of room for you to kind of fall through the gaps and not get any kind of praise, to not get any kind of acknowledgement. And even as you start to get closer and closer to accomplishing goals, usually the better it seems you do in developing a program, the more there becomes that you need to do. Um, I think of some of the devs I've talked to, at Spotify specifically, and their kind of difficulties with, every time we do something really well, a new request, a new feature comes up. So it's like my reward for doing something really well is having to now do something else really well, um, and setting a new standard. So it's like, when does it end? And
Yeah.
what is what is the achievement here?
So I actually had a pretty interesting question in here, which is, as like a lead or a manager, what are some good first proactive steps you can do when you start to feel like one of the people you are either, in some level of in charge of is looking like they're on the precipice and or burning out?
Yeah, yeah. it can seem really counterintuitive initially, but give them time off if it's at all feasible, if it's all at all affordable. um, Time away is absolutely massive. It takes about a week for someone to really start to begin the unwinding process. Ideally, it takes about 2 weeks when somebody finally disconnects from things. That's where they're not thinking about the emails, they're not thinking about the project as much. They're starting to shift more into relaxation. Um, and I've noticed that shortly after that 2-week mark is where there's almost this full cycle back to where somebody kind of misses some of these things or starts to have more positive thoughts towards these things. You'll notice somebody that's burning out isn't innovating, isn't coming up with new things, isn't really excited or passionate about their project anymore. But given some time away from that stress, away from that pressure, they'll slowly potentially rebuild that passion and start to think, "Oh, I actually really want to work on this feature. I actually think there was a problem that I had a couple of weeks ago. I think I actually know the solution or have an idea for it." And they start to get that excitement again. So when they come back, they might bring that energy back. Um, Aside from that, or in addition to that, having much, much more achievable goals, breaking things down into things that this person can accomplish and measure, that's really good. Um, Sometimes it's like pushing a certain PR, or it's having, um, created or finished a full feature of stuff. Breaking those down into something much, much more achievable helps significantly because they're gonna feel the reward cycle, right? It's like clicking the, to-do list and completing it. We wanna break things down so that there's much more, um, display that something was done and not just we're getting ever closer, but there's still a long way to go. Um, and I think that can be extremely important. And then just praise, um, acknowledge them. Regular acknowledgement in the one-to-ones can be absolutely massive. In team meetings, acknowledging people, calling out their achievements goes a really long way towards this person feeling like they're accomplishing things and not just kind of stuck.
Okay, is that those are all really good things. Lastly, do you have anything to say about like some early signs in your life? Because I can kind of tell you personally, I could kind of see it happening for me. Looking back, is that I personally started playing a lot more video games, and this was kind of
Mm.
me in a sense coping during this time. I played a lot more. Normally, I'm not like I love like I grew up playing them. My dad died when I was young, and that was kind of like my large escape, if you will. That was always the greatest thing ever was video games. Played a massive amount of them until I was about, gosh, 25. Right around in there is when I kind of really stopped playing very much of them. And for the last 12, 13 years, I haven't played much of anything. And so I remember that during that time, the Falcor time, that was when I all of a sudden started playing a lot. I got all the way up to like diamond rank in Halo, feeling pretty good. I started playing a lot of Halo 3. Or whatever it was, Halo 5, I think at the time. Yeah, Halo 5. And so it's like at that point for me, looking back, that was kind of my early indicator was I was doing something kind of fairly unusual, I guess, for myself in this life period. Do you have any is that like a thing? First off, second thing, is there things people can look for in their own life that they're doing?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Something that I've seen, time and time again is most people are pretty aware of when they're kind of moving into unhealthy patterns, when they're finding unhealthy ways of coping with the problems in front of them. Um, this is stuff that can be hard to document at times, but that's almost certainly part of the solution is actually just kind of making a note of what I'm doing when I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed. Sometimes it's instinctively just opening up YouTube or opening up Twitch or opening up Twitter. Sometimes it's launching a game. There are things that we'll do almost impulsively when this is starting to set in, when we're starting to become overwhelmed with the stress. Um, I try and write that kind of stuff down. Even if you aren't very familiar with taking these kinds of notes or daily journals, it's a really helpful practice. It's a really great way to reflect on what's going on in your own life, things that you wouldn't normally notice. You're now making that mental note of. So jotting these things down. I've noticed I've played more games today. That's something that you can think in the moment while you're actively playing a game, but writing it down actually makes that strong mental note of, oh yeah, actually I am. In the past few days, I've noted down that I've been playing more games than usual. Okay, so maybe that's something I need to work on. Um, Once we start to kind of put that down on paper somewhere, it's a lot easier to tackle, to acknowledge. Um, so we can notice these things when we become aware, when we give ourselves time to be aware of these things. The other sides of this is that it's not inherently bad for us to distract when we're feeling overwhelmed or stressed. Um, but having a line that we draw between, okay, I'm just stressed and, this is a healthy distraction versus like, I've been playing games for like the last 10 and a half hours or 11 hours and didn't do work today. Obviously, something is clearly wrong there. Something's not going well there. Setting aside specific times where we can engage in some of these behaviors and kind of giving ourselves that as a reward can be extremely helpful. Um, but that's stuff that, from my experience, all of this stuff is really hard to do when you're in the middle of it. Usually we got here because we don't really do these kinds of practices. We don't incorporate these kinds of things, and healthy and unhealthy blend together really, really fast. Um, I think really the best way, if you're in the midst of it, is to focus on the basics. Anytime I see somebody really overwhelmed, really flooded with stress, I always try and encourage focusing much more on the basics. Don't try and solve all of the biggest problems going up on in life. Try and solve the sleep problem. Try and solve the eating, the diet problem. Try and solve the exercise problem. Try and solve the just spending some time thinking problem. Even if it's just sitting in the shower in the morning and not doing anything, but just really thinking about life, not being distracted, but letting it kind of hit you, those are really important times for us to have. We lose track of those basics very, very quickly. So if we can just return to those once we start eating better, sleeping better, exercising a bit better, reflecting better, the other problems that we have in life become much more approachable, much more solvable. The solutions become much more apparent, feels less overwhelming altogether.
All right. Uh, I really like that. I really like that. I think that, I always call one of my perennial tweets is just the pathway to become a better software engineer is to eat healthy, sleep more, exercise, like touch grass, like all the simple things. And because it just helps me. Like one of the easiest ways I know that I'm gonna just have a terrible day is just I don't get enough sleep for 2 3 days in a row. I'm gonna fight with my wife. I'm not gonna, like I'm just gonna be all out of sorts pretty quickly. The same thing with eating. I can tell it right away. If I eat within the next 6 hours, it does have an impact on just like your just general perception, how you perceive things, how you kind of communicate out. And so just trying to be really careful on those things seems to just make the biggest bang for the buck,
Yeah.
which is strange because it feels like eating. Okay, you're just getting calories in, calories out, right? It's straightforward. It's like no, there's actually quite a bit of hierarchy to it, and you really should do that a lot better. And sleeping, again, very very simple. Go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, and that will just change your life. Just as simple as that.
Yeah. I mean, those mixed with in my opinion, meaning and purpose, invaluable. And I think about those things, quite a bit in my own life, meaning and purpose. Um, part of what got my connection to you, ultimately through Theo, um, was how I built the website and what transpired there. Um, because I had never coded in my life prior to meeting Theo. um, and had no experience with it, but I was trying to get a new website for a nonprofit, and every agency I went to, every group I talked to wanted a ridiculous amount of money. And I thought, if I could figure out how to build a website from scratch, and the process of doing that, time wise costs less than hiring an agency, then great. That's like good value. That's worth it. And it ended up figuring out how to code, and do the site, the front, the back end, everything within the span of a month. The person that was kind of giving me feedback was like, "Hey, like you're starting to have questions that like I don't have answers to. You should reach out to this guy. He could probably help you." And when Theo, realized that I, learned JavaScript, and Node and all of this within the span of a month, was like, "Oh, that's not normal. I should connect you to other people, because that doesn't happen." Um, and I think even just over the weekend, of meeting Theo and some of his friends, learned TypeScript and switched over to TypeScript and making things type safe. I think since then, I've learned Rust and C Sharp, Svelte, and so many other things, usually within the span of a week to 2 weeks. Um, all of it because a lot of these principles we've talked about, I've kind of refined down, to avoid the over procrastination or the over perfection process, really time gating, um, being very quick about rewards, being very specific and purpose driven. Um, the goal obviously was very, very clear. It was not a vague one. It was, we just need to get a working website, and this is how we define a working website and save money. And here's how we save money: by only spending X amount of time working on it. So the project had deadlines, it had specific measurables and markers. Adding in new features, learning new things came along as it made sense within the project framework. And then, funny enough, once the website was done, I just stopped coding. I was just like, cool, I don't need this anymore. Like we did the thing, until, many, many months later, where I just found so many different problems, that could be solved by coding, and then, really developed a passion for it. Um, I think it also helps though that there's a level of detachment. Um, I when I run into people who are trying to figure out what stack they should go with, or who they should follow as in terms of an influencer, or where they should get the latest information, if they should, write code this way or that way. All of those things, can seem really important to them because it's a part of their identity within the community. For me, it's, I don't know, whatever works, whatever I enjoy. I don't really, I don't have as much of a stake in it. For me, it's a means to an end, and I think a lot of us lose track in that. The true meaning, true purpose, tends to usurp all of those things and makes just about everything else we do much, much easier. But that's really hard. That's a harder part of life. Finding meaning and purpose.
Slightly more difficult than finding what stack you're gonna do. Well, hey, thank you very much for coming on the show. I want to try to keep it brief enough that people will stick around and listen to the whole thing. This was awesome. So obviously, you run Rise Above the Disorder right here at RAD. You're on Twitch. You're on the Twitters. You kind of are all over the place. Is there any important links people should know about when trying to find you? And second off, what is a good place? Is yourrad.org/donate a good place to go to donate?
Yes, absolutely. If you go there to donate, that's going to cover somebody's therapy session today, tomorrow, almost certainly right away, because there are lots of people applying. We get about 400 applications a week. So there's a huge demand for free therapy. So you can make somebody's therapy session possible today. In terms of finding me, I'm on Twitter as well. My tag is just Jason Docton, my full name. So you can always look me up. I don't post a whole lot. I'm trying to get into the habit of doing that, but maybe if you follow me or ping me enough, I'll definitely start responding more. Certainly happy to answer questions. So look me up.
Right there. All right. Thank you very much, Jason. I appreciate that.
Thanks, man. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, yeah. Take care.